Hello and welcome to another conversation with Think Design Work Smart channel from Mozaic Works. I have with me passionate about product development and a book author whom I learned a lot when she joined our conference Product Leaders a few years back, when we could have conferences live and in person. And we'll have a discussion about some of her work and some of the things that she knows really well how to do. So welcome, Radhika. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
uh, Typically, for a few warm-up questions, or a warm-up question is just how did you end up doing what you are doing now? What led you to this path?
Yeah. So my path started with finding product management kind of accidentally. My first few roles were in entrepreneurship. Right after graduating, I started my own company called Lobby 7. And, there I encountered the first of those product diseases I often talk about. Um, where we built a technology and it was amazing technology, but it was just too early to market. And that was the first experience that I learned from. And it was very much, this was 20 years ago, right? And very much like what we had learned was the way you build products is just try different things in different markets and see what sticks. And that's how you build products. And that's exactly what we did. And we kind of built an amazing technology, but ran out of money at some point. The company was acquired and the technology was great, but that was the outcome. And so from there on, right, I was lucky enough that when I worked at a company called Avid, I got exposure to a much more vision driven approach to building products. And what's interesting is at the time, my title was, I think it was called Program Manager for Custom Engineering. This is about as far away from product as you can imagine, right? And yet, we had such a clear vision in our team. We were just starting to tackle the market for broadcast. Our products were used in the movie industry, and practically every Oscar movie ever made was using Avid. But at the time, we were new to broadcast, and we really had a vision for where we were going. And my role was to talk to customers, figure out what they needed, and then work with them to incorporate that into our product, and very strategically, like instead of really making it custom. So pretty much exactly what a product manager does for a new product. And so that was my introduction to product management. And the big question since then, this was like about 15 years ago, right? Over time, what I've realized is, why is it that there are just a few people who have this intuition for building products that are vision driven versus the vast majority, what we are taught is just try things in the market, see what works, right? And
Mhm.
so the question I landed with was, is it possible to learn how to be one of those visionaries in product development where we systematically create change through our products? And that's how I ended up working on this methodology, so that we could all learn from some of those experiences that I've earned kind of the hard way.
Mhm.
Maybe we don't all have to go through those same hard experiences to
Yeah.
learn kind of how do we build those, how do we build world-changing products? And it's not always through iteration.
Mhm. So you're saying that in a way, by using your methodology, people could burn these steps and get faster to learning how to do product management better, or how it should be done.
Exactly. And it's not just for product people, but you're exactly
Mhm.
right. It's about how do we think about our product as a mechanism for creating the change we want to see in the world. So, as product people, anything can be your product. So, whether you're a freelancer doing design, or you're a product person, or you even work in a nonprofit, your product is whatever you're working on to bring about a change in the world. And if you're creating change, it has to be vision driven. And that's where, we have this idea that there are just a few people who can be visionaries, someone like a Steve Jobs or an Elon Musk. And by the way, it's typically someone who is male and white, but we don't have to kind of look at it that way, that anyone can be a visionary. And it all starts by having a very clear vision. And this book and the whole methodology, it's really meant to demystify what does it mean to have a good vision? Like, how do you actually do that? And how do you create this? How do you start with this clear vision and then translate it very systematically into action?
So you're saying that even if, let's say, I have a small shop doing, I don't know what, carpentry or some types of manufacturing goods, I could still use this idea of trying to get beyond just selling things and be visionary about my products. Can you go that far away?
You could. Here's how I look at it. I think the simpler your product is, or the simpler your organization is, it's like doing algebra where, let's say, the problem is x minus 1 equals 0, right? When you see a problem like that, you're like, just intuitively, you know the answer. Of course, x is 1, right? The more complex your product, the more complex this algebraic equation. There comes a point where it's harder to solve the problem using intuition alone. So wherever you're starting to see a more complex product where there isn't one obvious answer, like, of course, duh, this is what you do, that's where you can use this methodology to very systematically create change. What I've found is, what happens is if you're working by yourself, a one-person team, you have your own vision in your head, and it's easier to just translate that into action. The more complex the product or the organization, you're working with multiple people, each person invariably has a slightly different idea of what the end goal is and how you're going to achieve it. And this is where, you're all trying to work on this really complex algebraic problem. This is where intuition alone isn't enough, and why a systematic approach is more helpful.
So it can help you to understand a bit about each other and trying to level the decisions and maybe align in a way for your vision. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Because what happens when we are just iterating is, we've learned lean and agile methodologies. It's all about how do you iterate fast. And iteration is good, but I often talk about iteration as having a fast car. So you can go fast, but a fast car is only helpful when you know what the destination is. And so when I see teams who are just working on iterating fast and optimizing their speed of iteration, what I realize is, often people are all going fast, but in different directions. And that gives you speed, but it's not velocity. And so it's the direction that we really need.
Yeah, I mean, you could very well build the wrong product very fast. It's not what you want, right?
Exactly right.
I think there are a few quotes of famous product or management authors saying that you could it's not the speed is that important. You need to know where you're going.
Exactly. And it's when we don't know where we're going and we're just iterating fast that I've seen these product diseases that I often talk about. And the product diseases, some of them that I've caught myself, like I mentioned to you, my first startup, I caught a product disease. That was hero syndrome. This hero syndrome is so common among startups where you really want to focus on being big. And it's such a strong focus on being big that you forget kind of what problem are you solving in the first place. So in our startup, just to give you kind of our you can really tell hero syndrome from the fact that our tagline or even vision was enlightened. Our tagline was enlightened wireless, and our vision was that we wanted to revolutionize wireless. This was back in 2000, right? And what I realize is there are so many companies that have a vision statement that's like this, revolutionize something or reinvent something. And that really is a form of hero syndrome, because we think that, we just want to be big. How we measure ourselves is based on the scale of our impact. How much money have I raised? And honestly, this is how we were kind of measuring ourselves, like, oh, how much media attention had we gotten when we were doing this startup, or mentions in press, or for instance, how much money we had raised, etc. But that's kind of not what is really a measure of success. And so hero syndrome is one such example. But another common disease for startups, but even larger organizations, is pivotitis, where we try one thing after another, and then just keep switching from one strategy to another.
So you're not doing anything at the end. You're just pivoting around.
Exactly. And funny enough, right? Like what we've learned is, being an entrepreneur is all about pivoting at the right time. We make it seem like pivoting is the answer to being an entrepreneur or building and scaling your product. And the reality is, whether you're a startup or a large company, what I've observed is you have about 2 to 3 pivots before you run out of either money or momentum. And it's not one of those things where you can just keep pivoting. Once you have it's like having just a few silver bullets. And so the real trick is not having to pivot so much, like saving those pivots for when it's absolutely essential. And so when you're more vision driven and you've really figured out your vision and strategy, you're really saving those silver bullets for when you need it most.
So I had like the next question for you. What is product development or product management? What does that mean for you?
Yeah, so for me, product development and really product thinking is what I really look for in product development. To me, product thinking is about a team taking ownership of the vision for the product, and then being able to incorporate this vision into everyday decisions. And so this way, the end result of what comes out of this product team, it's designed very systematically to be aligned with kind of what is it that they wanted to create in the first place. And so, this all sounds kind of abstract, but maybe like it'll be helpful if I talk about what I mean by owning the product vision, right? Very often, the vision, we've learned that it has to be broad, like for instance, the revolutionizing and the reinventing that I've talked about. But owning the product vision means that every person on the team can describe in their own words, like an entire problem statement and solution statement for what are we trying to do, why is it important to do, and what will the world look like when we're done. And so I talk about this as answering the who, what, why, when, and how questions. It's basically, whose world are we trying to change? What does their world look like? Why does it need changing? And honestly, maybe it doesn't need changing. So often we talk about disrupting, but like maybe it doesn't need disrupting, being honest about it. And then, what does the world look like when we're done? Meaning, how will we know that we have accomplished what we set out to? And last thing is, how will we bring that about? What's our mechanism for bringing that about? So when we answer the who, what, why, how questions, this is where the alignment that you were talking about really comes in, where everyone on the team has the same answers to the who, what, why, when, and how. And typically when you start this exercise, you'll always notice that different people have slightly different takes. And so I usually do this exercise as a team together. So this is the starting point as a team where you craft this really detailed vision. And once you have this vision, then you can use this in everyday decisions. When you actually have a feature that you're saying, should we do this or not? Now this vision is detailed enough where you can hold it up against this vision and say, should we do this? And you will get a clear answer. And sometimes the answer is no. Whereas when you have a really broad vision, like, revolutionizing wireless, hold up anything against that feature. It's like, yes, let's do it,
So Is this everything that we talked until now? Is this what you put under the umbrella of the concept of radical products, or is it more?
And that's, I think, the start of it. In the book, I also talk about, how we can build a strategy, what it means to put this into priorities. Um, the one other topic that I talk about in the book is the effect of product diseases on society. This iteration led approach, the way it manifests itself in our organizations is in the form of product diseases. And the same iteration led approach, the way it manifests itself in society when these product diseases are really common, um, is what I call digital pollution.
Mm-hmm.
So, what I mean by that, right, is um, when we iterate, very often we're so focused on just moving our financial metrics up and to the right, like everything moving up like a hockey stick is what we desire, right? But when we take a step back and we think about what effect is it creating on society, often just focusing on optimizing for financial metrics has collateral damage. And by collateral damage, I mean things like, we often, through our products, maybe increasing inequality. If, for example, through our AI algorithms, or just not even AI, our algorithms, we're not thinking about how are we creating equity in our population, or, for example, erosion of privacy. We very often think we just need to maximize what we collect in terms of data because you never know what will be useful.
Mm-hmm.
That is a form of digital pollution because once you collect data, it's no longer, you can no longer guarantee privacy for a user. Um, and this is all, and without having privacy, it's very hard to have democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Privacy can't just be for journalists and human rights activists. It's either for everyone or it's for no one. And so by doing things like this, where we maximize, uh, just the financial metrics, we often create digital pollution. And whether it's measuring data or collecting metrics, all of these things have to be driven by a vision for, what is it that we want in our product and how do we want our product to affect society. That's what I mean by having this clarity of vision and why it's important both for avoiding digital pollution and diseases.
Isn't this a bit, let's say, too much for the I don't know, average startup to think about all these things? It might seem that they need to know a lot of things, and well, they need to have certain number of values. So thinking about digital pollution and the society, well, probably most of the startups just say, we hope we'll get something here."
And you're so right. That is exactly what happens with startups. And it goes even a degree further, right? Like I remember talking to an entrepreneur and I asked him, so he was building a chatbot that sounded, very human, even a chatbot that had some attitude. His product had gone viral. So I asked him, so, what's your end vision? And he goes, well, I want to create all these chatbots and then we can all be friends, for example, on Facebook, where, all these chatbots are interacting with each other and with people. I was thinking, well, so what do you think about the ethical issues around this? What do you think would happen? And he goes like, oh, for us, I don't want to slow us down by thinking about those things right now. When we're big, then we'll think about it.
Hmm.
But here's the problem, right? Like once you are big, it's too late to think about those things.
Yeah.
And the realization, you're right that as startups, we don't think about it right now. We almost even take a heroic attitude that, oh, I'll be able to control the data. This is exactly what WhatsApp did when they sold out to
Hmm.
Facebook. They collect metadata about who calls who, even if the conversation is encrypted. And their assumption was that they will be able to protect this data. And they sounded like heroes even as they were selling out to Facebook. And that's the thing, right? Like, I think earlier on, maybe a decade earlier, we could get away with this saying, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't think these bad things would happen. But increasingly, we're seeing the effects of digital pollution. Now, when we take the same attitude, we're no longer accidental villains. It's more like we are
Part of it.
not quite accidental, like very determined villains, right?
Mm-hmm. It's like traffic. You can never blame traffic if you're in a car driving a car. You are traffic. It's a bit the same.
I love your analogy.
Yeah. So you're going far beyond what typically you think when you think about software products or products in the digital age, digital products. Are there any other things that you think is important to take into account when thinking about product development?
You're right that this does go, well beyond just traditional product development, where it's just, traditional product development evolved from project management, right?
Yes.
As a product manager's role often evolved from project management, where the project manager was responsible for learning about stakeholders and what they wanted, and then delivering those features on time and on budget. The way product management has evolved from those days is very often, it's still very much the same thing, but it's called product management. Those who have moved one step further, instead of collecting orders from stakeholders, we're collecting orders from customers.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, we're asking customers, what do you want? And then building that.
Mm-hmm.
Where I see we need to go is one step beyond that, which is, instead of order taking from customers and putting the customer in the driver's seat, the reality is the product manager should be in the driver's seat. And the customer is on the outside, you're asking them for directions.
Mm-hmm.
The customer is helping you understand if you're going on the right track or not. But someone has to know where you want to go. It's pointless to ask the customer unless you know where you want to go. And that ownership of that vision has to come from the product manager. Why? Because otherwise, right, if you look at the project management model where the stakeholder is telling you where to go, that's very often where you get pivotitis, because one day the stakeholder wants one thing, another day they want another thing. The same pivotitis happens even when you're being customer led, which is the customer is telling you, oh, today I want this. Tomorrow, there's a different customer who's louder than the first who tells you, oh, no, I want this instead. And so you have the same pivotitis. Mm-hmm. But if you as a product manager really know where you want to go, because you understand the needs of a lot of these a lot of these customers, you've really had a chance to process it, figure out in the end, what is it that they really need, not just what they're asking for. And then you're driving towards that and you're asking customers for directions along the way. That's really the model that we want to go to. And so you're right in that in moving towards this, right, it's really a new mindset and it's a new philosophy almost. And that's the harder part of adopting this new philosophy. But you're right, it is much more holistic than kind of the techniques of product management.
Didn't you see or didn't you envision a risk of when you have the product manager in the driver's seat of a thing that I often see, especially in big corporate environments that had some products or had customers of the same kind for a long period of time, so old companies that start building products, and you have these product managers who have a lot of business experience, but they say, I don't need feedback from clients, from no one, I know what they need. Don't you think there's a risk of putting product managers in this chair, saying you should be in the driver's seat, but in a way taking decisions without validating them too much?
You're right. I've seen this too. And in fact, I have a name for this disease. It's called Narcissus Complex, where we feel like we really know the answers and we're building features, being so inward focused, saying, I know exactly what they need. This is what they need. And it's based on your own wants, your own features that you think you would want being in their place.
Yeah.
And you're so right that it's easy to fall into that trap. But it's even if you're in the product seat, or if you are listening to stakeholders, this disease comes up, even because stakeholders think, I know exactly what the customer needs. And
Exactly.
so this is part of really making this muscle memory, where being in the driver's seat means you write a vision, but then you say, you know what, I'm going to both the vision and strategy that I've written down, those are just my hypotheses. It
Hmm.
is not valid unless I've actually tested this with customers. And this is where you're setting your destination, and now it's time to, check with your customers to see if you're on the right track. And then, you discover along the way that, oh, I was so wrong about my destination. This is totally, not it. After all this feedback, I'm realizing there's nothing to see down there. Actually, I need to move my destination slightly here. But once you take this approach, even when you're in the driver's seat and you discover the destination needs to change, the big difference is that you're actually acknowledging that, look, I was wrong. This is not we're going here instead. And now you're aligning the whole team, saying, look, here's what we learned, here's what we're going to do differently. And this process of alignment actually makes it easier for the team to not say, oh gosh, here we go again, another
Hmm.
pivot, right? It's actually like, oh, we learned something. Here's progress. It feels like progress because you've learned something, as opposed to, oh, whoops, we misshot, and like, this is a pivot.
Hmm. So, did you use or try to, I don't know, teach or coach this way of thinking to um, product to the managers that, or to, did you work more with startups, or what's your experience on trying to see how people work in this way?
Yeah, so I've done this both with larger organizations and with startups. In larger organizations, the way, the challenges are slightly different from startups. So what I've found in startups is I can often get the entire team together, and then facilitate a session where we do vision and we talk about priorities and how that'll translate into priorities, etc. And they're able to keep that going because basically the entire team is on board with this new approach and philosophy. They're all adopting it and ready to go. Often what happens in a larger company, right, is maybe a few product managers see the benefit of doing this and they're like, wow, I want to take this new approach. But there's a lot of what I will call just organizational inertia,
Hmm.
where you want to move to this new way, but you don't have enough momentum from people around you. And so you have to go through this process of buy-in. So that's the challenge with larger organizations. And my suggestion for someone working in a larger organization, if you've bought into some of these ideas about how you create a vision and systematically translate it, my suggestion is doing two things. The first is start talking about some of these product diseases, right? And I've written about some of these product diseases, and I can share a link afterwards. But
Yeah,
also in the book, I
sure.
describe all of them.
I'll put it in the
Uh,
description.
Perfect. Sounds good. So talk about product diseases and which diseases you're seeing in your company. Once you agree on the problem, then it's easier to incorporate a new way of working. Uh, because, in larger organizations, there is the overhead of adopting a new approach because, like, you need to convince so many people and so many new people need to learn about it. So starting with a very clear, why do we even need a new approach, by talking about these product diseases is very helpful.
Hmm.
That's the first step. And then the second thing is you can actually show some quick wins by starting with your team and using these exercises within your team. And once you've convinced your team, then you move upwards and you show this way of working with stakeholders. One thing that I often use with stakeholders to be able to introduce them to this new approach is once you have a vision statement, right? Talk about when you have to prioritize something. Let's say your stakeholders have certain strategic initiatives that they have in mind, or they're even asking you for certain features. what you can do is draw up a 2x2, like an X and a Y axis. Your Y axis is your vision fit, and your X axis is survival. And so your survival may be financial. For example, if you're a startup, your survival may be stakeholders and stakeholders approving of your product if you're in a larger company. And so things that are both good for your vision and good for survival, those are, of course, ideal. Things that are ideal are mostly what you'll focus on. But if you only focus on ideal, then you're being very short-term driven. And so sometimes you have to invest in the vision. Investing in the vision is basically where it's good for the vision, but it's not helping you survive in the short term. So an example of this would be if you're refactoring code for 3 months, you're not seeing immediate benefit from it, but in the long term, it's going to help you with a vision. And then the opposite of investing in the vision is what I call vision debt. This is where it's helping you survive. Like, for instance, let's say you're taking on a custom feature for a customer, and it's helping you win a deal, but it's not good for your vision in the long term because it's just for this one customer. So once you are talking to your stakeholder, you talk about your feature and where it falls among these quadrants. And so you can convey your own intuition for what's a good vision fit and survival, and you have this discussion of priorities by agreeing on decision-making rationale, and you're bringing your vision into your discussion, saying, well, is this a good vision fit or not? Is this a good short-term thing or not? And so this is a good way of kind of sneaking in this new methodology. And that requires discussion about the vision. And then maybe that takes you further and you can start talking about your strategy and so on.
So yeah, typically with a big organization, this is the discussion that you need to have. In my experience, when you start having these discussions and start looking at things that can be improved, I think people are typically kind of open. Well, if you're in a good moment in time and you take that. How do you think all this vision affects the rest of or changing the vision, changing the way the product people think about everything? How does it affect the rest of the part of the products, like the production, the coding, selling, or whatever you do? Does your vision encompass those things as well?
So you definitely get buy-in from your developers, for example, of this vision, and your salespeople. You share it with them. So you definitely get buy-in from all of those stakeholders. Where you actually really incorporate things like your sales strategy, etc., is part of your strategy. So, for example, the strategy that I talk about, it consists of 4 elements, and I call it radical. So it stands for RDCL. The R is for real pain points. That's the first element of your strategy. What is the pain that makes someone come to your product? The design is, what is your solution for those pain points? That's the D. The C is capabilities. So, how will you power your design? So this is the technology you might have, the partnerships, etc., that you need to deliver on the solution. And then the last thing is logistics, which is, how do you deliver the solution to your customers? And the point that you just brought up about sales and pricing and your sales channels, etc. Very often in a product strategy, we work on the first 3, the R, D, and C. We completely forget about this logistics of how will you train your customer, how will you support them, what's your sales strategy and sales channels, etc. That's almost left as an afterthought. Oh, we'll think about that after we've built this product. The reality is that this is such a critical piece that it might actually change what your solution is and what pain points. So it needs to really tie into the rest. And so this is where, when you craft this product strategy, it's important to take into account this logistics element. And this is where you bring in other parts of your organizations, like the sales team, the marketing team, etc. But one of the benefits of doing this as a product manager for yourself is that you start to take on a more strategic role within the organization, because you are really facilitating these conversations. And going back to your point, you're really helping drive these discussions across these organizations, and you elevate your own role to more strategic thinking because of that.
Mm-hmm. I see. So typically it affects most of the organization when you start doing that. That's an answer in short, right?
Exactly. And it's a good thing,
Yeah.
and for your own role and kind of how you elevate yourself.
Now, I had a different question that in a way it can or is not, it is and not related to this. I'm really interested in your view on this idea of win-win situation with products and building products in this way. In a way, the fact that you talk about digital pollution, that or getting data from people, that doesn't feel like a win-win situation for the customers, the users, and quite often they don't even know what's happening with the data, or they are collected. So what would you think in from this point of view of a strategy of a product? What does that mean, having a win-win situation when you start building or start having a vision for an existing product?
Yeah, great question. And this is really about how can we bake this win-win situation into every step of how we build products? And that's kind of what it boils down to. So one of the things about the vision statement, by the way, is that you'll notice the way I talk about the who, what, why, when, and how. I don't talk about business goals. So your vision, there's no place for your business goals in this vision.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds so counterintuitive, because a lot of people say, well, if I want to be $1 billion company, that is an aspirational goal. Shouldn't that be part of my vision? And the answer I like to give is, think about a doctor. Imagine a doctor has the vision of, to build $1 million practice while treating patients. Would you think of that as a good vision? Would you want to go to that doctor?
Mm-hmm.
Most probably the answer is no. And that's the same attitude we have to adopt. Like, the reality is we're creating a profound change in the lives of our end users and in society through our products. And so our vision statement is where we're really talking about what's the change we want to bring. It's not about our personal gain. So that's the first thing. But then, this does not mean that we're building products altruistically. It's not to say that we're operating like charities by any means, right? We have to make money, and I'm very much in favor of making money. And this is where the vision versus survival that I talk about, that's where you take into account, the financial aspect, where, you can't keep operating trying to achieve your vision if you're not thinking about your short-term needs as well. But the thing is, if you're wanting to create this win-win situation, then you think about your vision and survival, and you say, if you're not creating a win-win situation, you're really taking on vision debt, meaning it's helping you survive, but it's not good for the vision, and being honest about it. And so the reality is, sometimes you may have to take on vision debt just to survive another day.
Mm-hmm.
But being mindful of that and saying, like, okay, I have taken on vision debt. This was wrong. How am I going to fix it? And knowing fully well that, sometimes you can't always fix it. And being very careful about what's that vision debt we take on. So basically, whether it's your vision, your product strategy, your everyday decision making of vision versus survival, each of those steps, we can think about that win-win situation.
So when you gave the example of WhatsApp, the fact that they gather information about the users, that's kind of that's one of these examples for vision. That can you give that, like in this situation?
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely call that taking on vision debt.
Mm-hmm.
If we're collecting, vast amounts of data without thinking about without thinking about privacy and how we will very diligently anonymize data completely and not have it tied to a person, etc. That absolutely is vision debt. But the reality is we've never recognized it as vision debt until now.
Or I don't know, if you start thinking of Bitcoin as a product, then the fact that it starts being polluting not just digital but also the environment because of huge energy costs, is the same?
Yes, exactly. And I love that you brought that up, because when I say digital pollution, I don't mean that it's purely digital. What
Mm-hmm.
I really mean is that it's pollution that's come up in the digital era. So similar to environmental pollution, which was the result of the industrial boom, in the digital era, we've created digital pollution, and it is often tied to environmental pollution, like you just pointed out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you had that. I really wanted to talk about this as well. You mentioned that in the strategy you don't put business objectives, and I read a bit about your um, observations of OKRs. So that's what why you'd probably don't use OKRs in the objectives, right? Or any kind of these business
Actually,
objectives.
yeah, it's slightly different. Why I don't like OKRs,
Mm-hmm.
and let me explain why. It's not so
Yes.
much because of not because of business objectives. It's more because well, we've assumed in our entire lives that the way you achieve success is by setting targets and goals. And this is kind of the bias that we've had, that this is what is needed for success. In reality, what researchers have found is when you set targets, it actually is bad for innovation. Why is that? It's because when you set a target, people are trying very hard to meet that particular target.
Yeah.
So you're less likely to try to experiment and and hit another goal, etc. When they're very like you'll focus on just the targets that have been set for you, as opposed to new things that you should actually be focusing on. That you may not have known when you set these targets. And so researchers actually have found that setting specific targets, it harms innovation more than saying do your best.
Mm-hmm.
This is one thing. The second thing that happens with setting targets is that people often don't buy in fully into these targets for two reasons. One is when you set a target, I'm going to be myself or anyone, right? Like psychologically, we feel like, oh, I have to meet that target. Otherwise, I risk my personal reputation. And so I'm going to want to push for moving that target a little lower. And this is what you see when you're setting OKRs. Everyone will try to not set targets that are too high, because you feel like
Mm-hmm.
you want to sandbag a little bit so that those targets are achievable. So again, that gets in the way of innovation. And the last thing is when management says, you know what, no, that's not a good enough target, we're going to set it here, that immediately makes people feel like I'm not bought into this target and how you're measuring me. So there is already that I'm not bought into it. But on top of that, a lot of ethical issues that come up are very often because of stretch goals.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, you look at Wells Fargo, Lucent, all of these ethical issues and huge fines that they got, and had to restate revenues, etc. All of that was because um, of having super high targets and stretch goals. So this is the bad part about setting targets. So why do OKRs do that, right? The reason OKRs set targets is because typically the vision is very broad. And because the vision is broad, you need OKRs to very specifically tell you what you're trying to achieve. But now that we've talked about a vision and what a detailed vision sounds like, you see that this OKRs was really forming a band-aid for the narrative of a detailed vision. So instead of setting these targets, which have these really negative consequences in terms of people's psychology and how they work together, just have a really clear vision instead of this band-aid of setting goals. And I know that this is such a radical idea, the idea that goal setting is actually bad for innovation. But the key thing is that research shows goal setting is good for very repetitive tasks. If you're stuffing envelopes, or if you're doing exercise where it's the same repeated action where there's one clear answer, targets are good. If you're listening to this discussion, most likely your product is not that simple, and in which case goal setting is actually really bad.
So what do you think about using goals? Like I'm quite often in organizations who they probably don't have a vision. They say they have one, but they don't respect it. Even the people who made it, they don't respect it. So what would you think of using OKRs in that situation, at least to recover to some area where you at least deliver something, and only after that trying to get broader and try to go towards innovation? Do you think that's a good approach? That's a good use of OKRs or goal setting?
See, I think the lack of a vision, and you're so right, very often this is the case. You don't have a clear vision, and so we're like, oh, let's just build something and we'll meet it based on these OKRs. But to me, the lack of a vision is like having these huge cracks in the foundation, right? And then OKRs is like putting duct tape on those cracks. So it's not really that useful. Like, we're not solving a real problem. We're hiding those cracks by putting that duct tape on it, right? And so the real solution is, it's really helpful to go back and talk about this vision, bring about that alignment. The OKR creates a false sense of alignment because the bosses at the top will say, here are our goals, this is to align teams. But as I was just sharing, people aren't bought into necessarily these super high targets. So you think you have alignment because you've set these big targets and goals. In reality, people aren't bought into it. Whereas the idea with this vision is, you do this as a group exercise. You're talking about the fundamental questions about your product, the who, what, why, when, and how. That's where the alignment comes in, not from setting these targets from above that are just handed down like commandments and go make this happen.
Okay. For our discussion that's coming towards an end, I'd like to just ask you, what if you'd like to add anything, if you feel that we missed something that around your concepts of radical product development.
I don't think so. I feel like we've covered so much in this. I think maybe the only thing we missed out was world hunger, but maybe that's another conversation.
That's something else.
But maybe just to share kind of where people can go from here on, maybe a few things. If people would like to get in touch, I'm available on LinkedIn. Also, my book comes out on September 28th. So that's available for pre-order. And I'm looking for a launch team. So if all of these concepts sound interesting and you'd like to be part of the launch team, please do reach out. And the last thing is that a lot of these tools of vision, strategy, etc., that's available for free on the website. You can go to radicalproduct.com and you'll be able to download that toolkit for free.
All right. Yeah, that was my next question, where people can find you. So you answered that already. Okay, so it was really nice chatting with you. Thank you for taking the time. And I really hope that, more products will benefit from your thoughts, from this discussion, from your website, from your book. and we'll see more products that I think bring more benefits and less pollution in a way, right?
That's my hope too. And thank you so much for these wonderful, thoughtful questions, Adrian. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Sure. Thank you so much. And for our viewers, thank you for watching. And until next time, please remember to think, design, and work smart.